So do we have Jeff on the line now?
I'm here.
Hi, Jeff. I'm
Hi.
so sorry. Woo! So Jeff, I'm not actually going to waste time introducing you so that folks can hear from you, but only to say that, I mean, not only has Jeff been one of the leaders in the MDGs, the founders of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, and a man who transformed the whole response to global health along with the belief that we can end global poverty, but he's also been one of the architects of the ODIS Financing for Development Conference, and he's just back. So Jeff, we're really excited just to hear some thoughts from you about what are the most important achievements or opportunities related to eradicating extreme poverty coming out of ODIS, but also like what's the unfinished business? What is there for us to do? Thanks.
Fantastic. Joanne, thank you so much, and thanks to all the wonderful friends in Results, which is just the greatest organization imaginable. I love what you do and want to help anytime. I want to try to show you a picture out the window. I don't know if I can. This is a risk. You may remove. Hold on. You tell me if you see anything. See?
Sure. Yeah, kind of.
You see St. Peter's?
Oh, St. Peter's.
Yeah. Happy to share that with you today. We have a meeting tomorrow with the Pope Francis has called. That's exactly how I feel, by the way. And he's called mayors from around the world. I'm thrilled that Bill de Blasio, my own mayor, will be here at the Vatican tomorrow. The mayors are getting together to talk about the same topic you're talking about, which is how to end extreme poverty, how to make the new Sustainable Development Goal era work. And I was just rereading and actually discussing just in the past hour the new encyclical Laudato Si. And I just do really recommend, if you haven't read it yet, please read the encyclical. It's beautiful, it's magnificent. It's really about the need to put the world economy in a moral framework. And this is the biggest challenge because the world economy is big enough, productive enough, technologically sophisticated enough to do everything we want to do to end extreme poverty, to ensure universal health coverage, to ensure universal schooling up through at least secondary level for everybody, to fight climate change, to decarbonize the energy system. We have a $106 trillion world economy now, and all of those tasks can be accomplished for, quote, just a few $1 trillion. And that means for a small percent of our annual output worldwide. Our problem is essentially a moral problem, which is why the Pope is properly calling the world out on this and saying, come on, let's get on with it. Because we don't lack for the means, we don't lack for the solutions. If we don't have them now, we can invest in R&D to come up with better applications, better batteries, better ways to do things. But the capacities are so large and the wealth is so great that what we do face is what Pope Francis in his exhortation Evangelii Gaudium called the globalization of indifference. Now, Results is the antithesis of indifference. You are the difference makers, and you're the ones that are alerting the world and our Congress that we absolutely need to pay attention. We need to break this spell of indifference, and we need to invest in solutions for human well-being. So it's a beautiful encyclical, and that's what Pope Francis will be discussing in part with the mayors tomorrow, and then we'll have a session with the mayors on Wednesday on how to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals at the city level. And maybe, Joanne, that's where I can come in. This summit that just took place in Addis really is a curtain raiser for the meeting in September at the United Nations. On September 25th, actually Pope Francis will open the day with an address to world leaders. And then by the end of the day, the 193 member states will gavel 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And our job is to make them real, to make them known, to make them understandable, and to finance them so that they are successful. 17's a lot. I can tell you, since it took me a while to remember the 8 MDGs, you have to practice in front of the mirror a while to get 17 down. I thought it was not doable at the beginning, so I kept urging all the governments as best I could, get them down to 10, but they wanted distinct goals for several categories, and therefore ended up with 17. But when you read the encyclical Laudato Si', also then take another half hour to read online the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as they are now. They're not finalized, but they're essentially final, I would say. I'd be very surprised if the numbers changed or if there was any significant change of wording, maybe any change of wording from this point forward. And what you'll see is actually a quite wonderful agenda, because the Sustainable Development Goals call for big things, big stretch objectives, boldness on our favorite topics. All of the governments are going to agree on this. And then our job, and this is results genius, is not to have them disappear into the vapor of the media, not to have them disappear as a scrap of paper to be filed on some kind of photo op, but have them be the real deal for the next 15 years of global cooperation that we are really putting our shoulder to for success. And this is what I'm saying everywhere I can, and that's a lot of places these days, because I'm basically just on the move. In the General Assembly last week, in Addis in recent days, I was in Rwanda yesterday. My main message is take these goals seriously and ask the question seriously, how is country X, city Y, and therefore the whole world going to achieve these goals? What's the plan? What's the financing strategy? What are the technologies that are going to be deployed? Who's going to do it? What's the organizational methodology? Because if we think in terms, not that education's good, SDG 4, that's nice, but rather SDG 4 says specifically universal completion of secondary education for all boys and girls by 2030. Then we're in a different kind of problem solving. We're not saying education's good, let's do something nice for education. We're saying something quite specific. How do we scale up education effectively so that there is 100% completion rates around the world? Even the United States, of course, doesn't have this because we have a lot of high school dropouts. But in Africa, we're talking about countries where completion rates at the secondary level may be 20 or 30% right now. And their business as usual path might reach 40 or 50% by 2030. But the SDGs are telling us no, 100% by 2030. And then we need to think, okay, what are we going to do? That's a lot of teachers. That's a lot of training, that's a lot of new facilities. What's the timeline? What's the budget? How can we use information technology, which is my favorite theme? How can we use this great tool that we have to accelerate teacher training, to improve what's happening in the classrooms, to give online materials, to make it so that every time a young child from age 6 onward is in front of a screen, and that's okay that they have access to 100,000 free books online so that they can read, they can learn, they can study, even if they're in a rural village that has little more than the screen and a solar panel and the broadband wireless connectivity to connect them to that. We need to be creative, to leapfrog, to move fast, and so forth. If you look at SDG 3, that's universal health coverage. And results has been huge. And Joanne Carter, can everybody applaud Joanne all the time? See, Joanne, that's applause heard around the world. Results has been phenomenal in PEPFAR, in PMI, in the Global Fund, in getting these crucial initiatives off and running, properly funded, the US supporting it. And now, if you look at the agenda, though, it's even bigger. That's what I'm trying to say. So SDG 3 is, first of all, universal health coverage. That's everybody. We need to make sure through every trick we can, and by trick I mean technological innovation, community health workers frontline, telemedicine, everything that we can deploy to get universal coverage. And then when you read the targets, you'll see that while the MDGs were about communicable diseases, maternal health, safe pregnancy, safe delivery, and nutrition-related disorders and diseases, the SDGs are about non-communicable diseases as well. So cardiovascular, cancers, metabolic disorders like adult onset diabetes, mental health, so that there's access to community health services for mental health. So the agenda's expanded, and the reach is not to cut by half or cut by 2/3 or cut by 3/4. It is to bring universal health coverage. Now, one thing to remember about the SDGs also is that unlike the MDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals are explicitly universal. They apply to the United States as well as to Rwanda, where I was yesterday. And that means that this is not only about fighting extreme poverty, because thank God, while the United States has a lot of poverty, it doesn't have much of World Bank definition extreme poverty. So it's about the US addressing the vast inequalities of income in the United States, because SDG 10, for example, is to reduce inequalities within and among nations. And that means us. And it also means fighting climate change. And SDG 13 is calling for deep decarbonization of the energy systems of all countries so that we reach zero net emissions of carbon in the second half of the 21st century so that we can stay below the 2 degrees Celsius so-called guardrail or upper limit that the UN member states in the context of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change have agreed. So these SDGs are for everybody. And that means we have work to do in the United States and work to do internationally. And the financing issue, which you were just taking up at the end of the last session, is also a broader and more complex financing item, because basically I think of it as how do we move the world's resources to invest in sustainable things and to stop investing in unsustainable things like the Keystone Pipeline or Arctic drilling, which is just nuts. Absolutely zero justification for either of those projects. We cannot fit Canada's oil sands into a 2 degrees Celsius carbon budget. We absolutely cannot fit Arctic drilling into a 2 degrees Celsius budget. And so Shell has no business drilling in the Arctic, and we have no business building a pipeline. All I can say is if they're going to build a pipeline, it's going to be empty. So if they build it, they're going to go bankrupt, and I'm going to do everything I can to make the pipeline company be bankrupt, because it makes no sense to be carrying Canada's heavy oil sands, for which there's no use in the world, safely to a refinery. So the name of the game on financing is the broad one of how do we shift resources towards sustainable investments in human capital, physical infrastructure, natural capital, social capital, business capital, and how do we shift away from unsustainable investments in things like fossil fuel energy or other high polluting industries. And that is moving trillions of dollars per year, because that's really how do we reshape the global investment program so that it is a sustainable investment program. Now, let me say very categorically, and the speakers did say it at the end of the last session, we need aid. Don't let anybody ever say that we're beyond the period of development assistance, because there are still poor countries, and as long as there are, they cannot do the things they need to do out of their budgets, even if they're saintly in how they use every penny. They just don't have enough to provide universal health coverage or education through the secondary level. So we absolutely need development assistance. And please tell the Congress, which is very confused on this point, that every time they have invested in meaningful, practical solutions, I'm not talking about dollars in shoeboxes in these insane wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm talking about money going to the global fund. When they have invested in those, the development community has produced superlative results. I was in Addis with Secretary General and with Michelle Sidibe, Director of UN AIDS, about 4 days ago, visiting a hospital in Addis, celebrating the fact that there are now 15 million people on ARVs staying alive, preventing their children from growing up as orphans, thanks to the work that Results has done, thanks to the work that Joanne has done, thanks to and yes, thanks to the fact that George W. Bush, who was not my favorite president on many things, came forward with PEPFAR, boldly put the US in the global fund. And if you look at the graph, of course, it's perverse in a way. The big buildup was under President Bush, and then President Obama leveled off the spending. I don't get it, actually, because the fact of the matter is, and this is where I think Results absolutely can help make a difference, a big difference, is we need to tell our Congress people that this is nonpartisan, this is bipartisan, this is just human decency, American know-how put to work, and it works. And we need to get America out there doing these things, because that's the purpose of all of us as human beings, and that's good for our country to be standing up and doing these good things as well. And the aid works. I'll tell you, by the way, somebody sent me a new academic study. I'm an academic, but I'm not a huge fan of academia often. They sent me a study that they found very puzzling. They did a survey. I'll send it to you, Joanne. You can share it with others. They went and studied what happened to the bed nets that were distributed. And the study showed that they went and they looked and they expected, all sorts of horrible findings, and the bed nets were in the houses and they were being used by the children. That was the bottom line. I had to say, oh, duh, what do you think? That was not exactly a huge surprise for me, because actually when you deal with fellow human beings, they like to stay alive, they like to keep their children healthy. When you deal with health workers, that they like to do a good job. And so this article was completely perplexed because, oh, the aid literature is filled with all of the agency problems that, things are going to go awry. And so the article is very puzzled. How did those bed nets get into the houses? And they do questionnaires and they do studies, and then they found out that, quote, the health workers have a pronounced pro-social attitude. So this is what we really need to tell our Congress, and we really need to go back and start again in a way, because, in the early 2000s, it was conservative Republicans that were the champions of foreign aid, that were the champions of PEPFAR. It was very religious communities that were big champions, as you know very well. And we had a bipartisan consensus. And we really need to get back to that. We don't need one party completely dissing foreign aid as if it's the worst thing in the world, and the other party agonizing and cutting foreign aid, not wanting to, but doing it anyway, which is kind of our current dynamic. And I really wish that President Obama and President Bush would get together. And maybe results can help do this. I'd like them to appear together to say, this is good for America and it's right for America and we're proud of what we do and this is nonpartisan, and let's both parties get behind an agenda where America is helping to save lives and educate children around the world, because it's the right thing to do. And I think we can accomplish that. So let me end by saying that what I'm hoping with the Sustainable Development Goals, first, I'm hoping that they have a real life, because this is crucial. And I'm hoping that we take them not as just nice things, but like we did with the Millennium Development Goals, we take them as practical, real, quantified goals, because that makes us think, how the heck are we going to do this? How are we going to get to universal health coverage? How are we going to get to universal education? Now, as I said, my belief is that information technology, just like we're doing right now, is going to play a much larger role, because I've seen it as the game changer technology for universal banking, for universal payment systems, for improving the functionality of microcredit, for doing so many terrific things. I think in schooling and health and in other areas can also be a huge leapfrog. But for the poorest countries, we're going to need to invest, and we're going to need to have the equivalent of what we've had so far, say for AIDS, TB, and malaria, for health systems. So we're going to need to move essentially to a global fund for health systems that is an integral program that fights not only particular diseases, as crucial as they are to fight, but also helps to deploy hundreds of thousands of well-trained, IT-provisioned community health workers who can be in communities, saving lives, getting universal health coverage available. We're going to need also a global fund for education. I've been working with Julia Gillard and the Global Partnership for Education, which is, of course, a wonderful initiative that we deeply, gratefully support, with Alice Albright, who does such a fantastic job. And I've been saying, and Julia and Alice have been saying, and Gordon Brown, who's the Secretary General's Special Advisor on Education, have been saying, we need to scale up financing, because if we're going to achieve universal secondary coverage in the poorest countries as well as the richest countries, we're going to need a major scale up of financing, just like we had with health during the MDG period. We're going to need that for education in the SDG period. So I'm advocating a global fund for education that can play the same role of giving both incentives, motivation, spirit, hope, and money to poor countries that get their act together to make a bold plan for education scale up. I even have my eye on Korea as hosting it, because Korea really knows how to teach its children and has used education as the leading edge of its historic development. Norway, I hope, will contribute. The UK, Germany, and of course, the United States ought to be in there. And I'll be in Japan later this month talking to Prime Minister Abe, and I want to get Japan on board as well. So this is something that I hope that results can also help to really have understood. The world will not be safe. It certainly will not be prosperous. It certainly will not be sustainable unless all kids are getting a decent education. It's just impossible. And if you don't have education, you're virtually condemned to a life of poverty, with a few exceptions, but not too many, unfortunately. And so we have our job to do, and we're going to need the financing behind it. Let's do everything we can to try to make good, high-quality development aid a bipartisan cause again. Let's tap religious communities and secular communities and NGOs of all kinds. Let's talk to Congress on both sides of the aisle. Let's get President Bush and President Obama together to make this case. This is what we need to do for peace. This is what we need to do for America. This is what we need to do for the world. And if anyone can do it, it's results that can do it. Thank you very much.